And today I want to tell you about a section that we prepared with my colleagues for our textbook. And this section is called Technology of Cutting Parts. Before cutting, it's necessary to inspect the fabric. For this, you need to determine the face side of the fabric, the wrong side, and on the face side, be sure to identify if there are any defects in the fabric, if they exist. Be sure to mark them with chalk so that they don't end up on the main parts. Next, determine the direction of the fabric's warp thread. As a rule, it runs along the selvage. Why do we need this? We need the warp thread. It must align with the warp thread on the pattern pieces. And in the bodice, the warp thread runs along the center front line. And on the back, it runs along the center back line. And on small parts, the warp thread runs along the center of the collar and also the stand. After laying out the patterns on the fabric, the feature of laying out patterns on checkered fabric is that you must maintain symmetry and alignment of the cross lines of the checks. We mark the checks along some control waistlines. We pin down the patterns with small buttons so that they don't shift, or with pins onto the fabric, and trace the contours of our patterns. But for individual tailoring, you must add seam allowances to the contours. The size of the allowances depends on how each seam will be finished and on the properties of the fabric. After adding allowances to each edge, we can safely cut out the pattern pieces from the fabric. Despite the complexity of cutting products from checkered fabric, it may seem that plain fabric is easier to cut, but we chose a method for you for making a blouse with a border pattern. And this border pattern runs along the selvage. And we want the model to have this border pattern located along the cuffs, the bottom of the back, in this way, and along the bottom of the bodice. If this is the case, the layout of the patterns should be placed in the opposite direction, not along the lengthwise grain, but along the crosswise grain. We also select the allowances depending on how the edges will be finished.